Hello, thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about multiplying with negative numbers, and just one really simple rule. I don't know if you can call this one rule, maybe two. If you're multiplying a bunch of things together and an odd number of them are negative, then the answer is going to be negative. Um, you can see how this is true. It's pretty easy, right? The If you do a negative times a negative, then it's positive, and then times another negative. That one doesn't have a matching negative to make it positive, and so that makes the whole thing negative. And if you multiply a whole bunch of things together and each negative has another negative that's a pair with it, so in other words, there's an even number of negative factors, then the answer is positive. Okay. Now, you may not have ever thought of that as a general rule, but it probably once you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, that's true. That makes sense. Now, here's my big tip for you. When you're doing multiplication, right? And algebra is all about doing lots of different complicated things, or lots of different simple things, but putting them all together so that it looks complicated. When you are doing some multiplication with negative numbers, you want to decide or figure out really what the sign of your answer for that little bit is going to be before you figure out what the product is. So in other words, you just take the is it positive or is it negative question off the table before you do any other math. Okay, so for example, here I've got negative 3 times negative u times negative 7v. And so you could say this is 3 things multiplied together, maybe 4 things if you count the 7, negative 7, and the v separate. But definitely a bunch of things being multiplied together. We're going to have to think about how do we do that? How do we deal with the 3 and the 7 and the u and the v? But before I do any of that, I'm just going to ask myself, well, is the answer going to be positive or negative? And so I just count 1 negative, 2 negatives, 3 negatives, odd number of negatives, the answer is going to be negative. So I write a minus sign or a negative sign right there on my paper where the answer is going to go. And I may rewrite my answers sometime down the road, but for now, I just write that down. And now I can not worry about what's the sign of the answer going to be. I know what that is right up front, set that aside, and now I just deal with how do I do the multiplication, right? What's 3 times u times 7 times v? Well, I can do the 3 times 7, that's 21, and u and v, I have to write those separately. Oh, probably should put it in alphabetical order. There's a little rule for free there. Put the u first and then the v. It's not required, but it's standard form. All right, so negative 21 uv, but notice I figured out the negative part before I even did any of the multiplication. Okay, let's do an example with, with some distributive property and whatnot. I just wanted to show you that this is true even when we have some addition and some other stuff going on. So I'm going to do negative 4 times a minus b. So I'm going to do negative 4 times a, negative 4 times minus b, and then 2 times a and 2 times negative b, or minus b. Okay, notice that I'm kind of being wishy-washy. Is it minus b or is it negative b? Well, we're going to think of every time I see a negative sign or a minus sign, it's just another negative in terms of multiplication. So negative 4 times a, there's one negative number, so the answer is going to be negative. It's an odd number of negatives. So negative, and 4 times a is 4a. And then negative 4 times minus b, the two negatives, that's an even number of negatives, and so it's going to be positive. And 4 times b is 4b. Now, 2 times a, well, they're both positive, no negatives at all, so it's just 2a. And then 2 times negative b, or minus b, that's one negative, so minus 2b. Finally, that whole rule about positives and negatives only applies to multiplication. We have to be really careful when we're talking about addition. So for addition, I'm going to change colors to show that I'm thinking completely different now. If the signs are different, we subtract, and we keep the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. That's the official math way of saying it. I like to say the bigger number, but that's technically all positive numbers are bigger than negative numbers, but leave that aside. So I'm going to add negative 4a plus positive 2a, and because the signs are different, I'm going to subtract, giving me 4 minus 2 is 2, and the bigger absolute value number is negative 4, so it's negative, so it's negative 2a. And then we'll do the same thing with the b terms, 4b minus 2b. 4b minus 2b, that's going to be subtract again, gives me a 2b, and the bigger absolute value number is positive this time. Now, this is funny, this isn't really on topic for us, but notice this is kind of an awkward presentation here. Negative 2a plus 2b. This follows one of our kind of informal rules for standard form, which is we like to have our variables, if at all possible, in alphabetical order. A first, B second. But I have another rule that I kind of like to apply that I think is just as useful, and that is if there's a negative number and a positive number, put the positive number first so that that negative number acts as a minus sign, and it doesn't tend to get dropped off at the beginning. So that negative 2a at the beginning, that's, it's kind of a tenuous place to put a negative sign. And so it's, sometimes we have to, but sometimes I like to rewrite the answers so that that negative sign is safely nestled in between the two terms and doesn't get lost. All right, well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this helpful.